This video was made in partnership with Newbie, who are just as obsessed with movies as we are. They're few and far between, and they're more often a miss than a hit, but every now and then a true gem comes along. Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 fairy tale horror movies. For this list, we're looking at horror films that are based on or inspired by fairy tales and folklore. To be considered, the movies do not need to be a direct adaptation of the source material or even stick to a single story. They just need to be, at their core, inspired by classic fairy tales and folklore. Also, we're being somewhat more liberal than usual with our definition of horror films by including thrillers with a horror element.
You're scared.
There's something wrong here.
Careful, dear. I'd hate for you to start something you can't stop.
Number 10. Hard Candy. This is the sort of film you could easily watch without ever thinking of fairy tales. But don't you think that 14-year-old Haley, the character played by Ellen Page, has made some rather distinct fashion choices? In her red hoodie and matching leggings, she's a modern-day Little Red Riding Hood. And in the role of the Big Bad Wolf, we have Patrick Wilson as 32-year-old photographer and predator Jeff. It's a dark and twisted game of cat and mouse that, although at times hard to watch, is absolutely riveting. The filmmaker claims to have not seen it as an adaptation of the classic fairy tale during production, but the obvious allusions did wind up influencing the film's marketing.
You work as a photographer, you find out real quick. People's faces lie.
Does my face lie?
Number 9. Good Manners. By the time the supernatural elements come into play in this 2017 Brazilian horror movie, you'll have completely forgotten you were expecting them. And that's not a bad thing. It's actually a testament to the strength of the performances and the filmmaker's genre-bending ways. Good Manners follows a young woman, Clara, who, estranged from her family, becomes a housekeeper for Anna, a woman going through an especially difficult pregnancy. Anna's strange cravings make a lot more sense when it's revealed, in spectacularly bloody fashion, that her baby is a werewolf. It's a wildly original film, one that, for all its modern touches, feels deeply rooted in the fairy tale tradition. It's a monster movie about motherhood and unconventional love, but also so much more.
Só sei que deixaram você de presente pra mim.
Number 8. The Hallow. Before being tapped to join the Conjuring universe as the director of 2018's The Nun, Corin Hardy first garnered attention with this excellent debut feature film. Released in 2015, The Hallow is a British-Irish co-production and is deeply rooted in the folktales of the latter culture.
Watch out!
The story takes place in a dark and decidedly spooky forest in rural Ireland, where something ancient and sinister lurks. The locals know to keep their distance, but when an English conservationist moves in with his family, his presence draws these evil forces out, resulting in a terrifying battle of life and death. Hardy blends various subgenres of horror to create something at once familiar yet undeniably his own. Number 7. Snow White, A Tale of Terror. No vague allusions, no tangential connections. This one says fairy tale loud and clear. You're getting an adaptation of Snow White, and it's being recast as a tale of terror.
What's the matter, dear? Cat got your tongue?
Don't let the overly explicit and rather generic title fool you, though. This film is a gem that, despite somewhat mixed reviews upon its release in 1997, is now held up as something of a classic fairy tale horror film. It's a very dark take on the tale that feels miles away from the Disney adaptation, but actually rings surprisingly true with how the Brothers Grimm told it. Plus, how often do you get a horror movie this niche that boasts acting talents like Sigourney Weaver and Sam Neill?
I'll take care of you.
Number 6. Sleepy Hollow. Boy, the 90s were great years to be a fan of fairy tale horror. Just 2 years after seeing Sigourney in Snow White, we got Johnny Depp in this supernatural gothic tale.
Their heads found severed from their bodies.
Their heads were not found severed.
American folklore might not have quite as long of a history to it as other cultures, but the legend of Sleepy Hollow, written by Washington Irving, is just about as classic as they come. Taking place in the sort of rich, spooky, and atmospheric world that only Tim Burton can deliver, and boasting solid performances all around, Sleepy Hollow makes for a viewing experience that is both evocative and terrifying. And to think, this adaptation was first developed as a low-budget slasher. We are glad Paramount took it back to the drawing board.
Fit enough to face a mortal adversary.
Number 5. The Lure. Little Mermaid fans, you may want to look away. After seeing The Lure, you may never look at Ariel the same way again. This film at once hews far closer to the original tale by Hans Christian Andersen in terms of theme and tone, while also pushing the narrative in bold modern directions. The Lure transposes the action to 1980s Poland, where after meeting a band on the beach, two mermaids, Gold and Silver, wind up following them ashore to discover a life of human desire and debauchery. What follows is a roller coaster ride of sexuality, murder, and a whole lot of music. Equal parts rock opera, fairy tale, and genuine horror film. The Lure is one of a kind. Number 4. The Company of Wolves. Didn't get your fill of Little Red Riding Hood with hard candy? We got you covered. This 1984 gothic horror fantasy blends elements of the Red Riding Hood story with various werewolf tales for a narrative that feels ripped right from the works of Andersen, Grimm, or Perrault, albeit with a framing narrative set in the modern day. The plot is somewhat meandering, but in addition to delivering plenty of scary moments, it also functions as an analogy for the transition from childhood to womanhood. Relative unknown cult actress Sarah Patterson shines bright as young heroine Rosaline, while Angela Lansbury is reliable as ever as her granny. For fans of practical effects in horror, the film is worth watching, even if only for the creative transformations. Number 3. Black Swan. We knew that the world of professional ballet was competitive and physically demanding to an extreme, but we never thought it could lend itself to a psychological horror thriller this effective. The film stars Natalie Portman as Nina Sayers, a young dancer with the New York City Ballet Company who shoulders the immense pressure of playing the dual role of both the black and white swan in a production of Swan Lake. Director Darren Aronofsky is a master of uncomfortable cinema, and this sees him operating in top form. As the stress of her position begins to chip away at Nina's mental health, she becomes a danger to herself and others. It makes for an exhausting viewing experience, but it is riveting, and an approach to Swan Lake like you've never seen it before. Number 2. Suspiria. Dario Argento's 1977 Italian supernatural horror film is unlike any released before or since, including its interesting 2018 remake. From the use of vibrant colors to the unconventional score provided by Italian prog rock group Goblin, it is a real lesson in redefining horror cinema. Though it's by no means a direct adaptation of any single fairy tale, the director did take many cues from fairy tales, not only in terms of the dreamlike atmosphere, but more specifically the visual manner in which Disney animation has historically told them. Of course, Argento then takes this tale of dance and supernatural conspiracy and absolutely douses it in blood. The film is an exercise in excess in every sense, but it's also an absolute classic of world horror. You know, if you go back to the original versions of most fairy tales, they could be made into horror movies easily. However, our number 1 pick is an original tale, but a terrifying one at that. So let's look through some horrifying honorable mentions, and then we'll find out our pick for top fairy tale horror movie.
I remember this house. The house of Adriana, the Great White Witch.
This ain't no fairy tale.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. Pan's Labyrinth. Long before The Shape of Water, director Guillermo del Toro already had a strong history of finding beauty in the monstrous. He blends horror and fairy tale elements in ways few can even imagine, and 2006's Pan's Labyrinth is easily among his best work.
Un día, burlando toda vigilancia, la princesa escapó.
Set in 1944 Francoist Spain after the Civil War, the film follows a young girl named Ophelia who becomes drawn into a world of magic, strange creatures, and enchantment. Though an original story, Pan's Labyrinth pulls from a wide variety of classic fairy tales and common folklore figures, including the faun. It's a stunning and truly moving film that, while perhaps less horrific than others on our list, delivers plenty of scares in the classic fairy tale sense. This video was made in partnership with Newbie, who are just as obsessed with movies as we are. Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.